Hello. It's been a while. So, I have a script. I wrote a script for this video. And yeah, so let's get into it. I have been extremely contemplative lately, and as such I have written a document here. A script, if you will, for this video to demonstrate and explain exactly what I feel and believe. I was about to say once and for all, but that would be silly. As well, just the recap of the year so that I do not lose the general feeling of my current state of being to the sands of time. So beginning in January, I have been using AI in extremely unhealthy ways. Essentially using it as a sounding board for emotional support, but also in the fleshing out of ideas and record keeping of scenarios, memories, so forth. I actually plan on compiling these dialogues concerning the history and observations I have written out through the discussions with the AI as an extension of the Neo Enlightenment podcast. Essentially, the cause of this unhealthy use of AI is a hurricane of factors over 3 years of isolation, having zero feedback response for any of my blithering, and the circumstance of having my heart split in twain by a woman in early February, as I wrote here, which is somewhat true. This was written a couple days ago. However, as I mentioned earlier with the dialogues and meal plan, there is a holy and unholy use. I even continue to use AI for feedback on a personalized, near-human or friend-like level for this script. Now, on to the concept and core of my ideal content creation. Over-documentation is what I call it. Over-documentation is essentially documenting every single thing, no matter how insignificant or small the extent, to the extent that no stone is left unturned. Having struggled with memory loss my whole life, this concept has always been important to me, and I have intended to practice it thoroughly throughout my life. I intend. A meditation on life I have been unable to express weighs on my mind's eye. True happiness is mourning. Mourning all that was not, finally coming to an end, accepting that end, an end to the suffering, nirvana, true beauty, etc. This is happiness. Nothing else is true happiness. Everything else is transient or fleeting happiness. Another meditation Another meditation is on my cadence, voice, and speech, which you might have noticed. I believe, or at least the best word for it in my current vocabulary, I have struggled with depersonalization. Further study is required to assuredly name the ailment, but for now let's call it depersonalization. Part of this is reflected in speech. When I speak, often my voice is not my own. Something else is moving my lips, speaking out in a voice I do not recognize. Even this description is inaccurate, as I have never truly associated me, the me, with parts of the body. It has always been a body, or a mouth, not my mouth or my body. I hardly recognize myself when I am in social situations. Sometimes even just alone, thinking in my internal dialogue. These videos are the most damning, a symptom of my father's hypoxia-addled speech patterns and childlike acting during speech. I get locked into modes. I call them modes. And for an example of what I mean by hypoxia-addled speech. So when my father would invent stories that didn't exist and didn't happen, and then he would play act them out as he talked to you. Sort of his eyes would glaze over and he'd start doing facial expressions and etc. And he'd sell it in a dramatic way and so forth and so on, and it's very cringeworthy. Modes. I get locked into modes. I call them modes. Modes of speech and thought. In one video, I'll start speaking in a country drawl, spawned out of nowhere. In another, I'll say something I totally disagree with and then desperately attempt to backpedal or further rationalize myself. The only things that have helped to counter this is the suit. The environment here in the rainy ocean shores, and speaking breathly with a breathy voice from the center of my chest and a deep voice from the very base of my throat, which is sort of how I'm speaking now. It's not quite it, but it's close enough. One topic of contention for this year specifically is my novel, the most important topic. As I write this, I do indeed see the seemingly comedic tragedy to taking the time to write out a screed after just stating that the novel is the most important task to me. I began serious work on my novel in April of 2024, and I wish to finally have this monstrous anthology of my life's works, beliefs, and an analogous fictional biography, complete by or around New Year's of 2027. This should not be too difficult, but may be entirely unattainable for unknowable mental reasons. A few ideas to kick around: live streaming, business cards, and a future website. I intend to give the aforementioned methods a college try and see where that path leads in terms of the wonderful wizarding world of content creation. Just a side note, non sequitur. I have also decided to prune the videos from the start of the Neo Enlightenment. This is not a censorship so much as it is a curation. Taking the best of the best, leaving the nonsense and filler behind, when at first discovering and contemplating over-documentation, I did not think that one could have over-documentation and division. I was wrong. If anything, over-documentation cannot exist without division. I found myself in a mess of 70-plus rather embarrassing videos that were largely filmed when I was in compromising situations. Even further, I often felt obligated to publish a video regardless of the quality because I felt if I broke a link in the chain, the idea would somehow be lost or hypocritical. This does not serve my goals, nor does it serve the Neo Enlightenment. I consolidated the most integral videos from the previous year into playlists named after literary divisions. To elaborate, the sections from the first video up to the beginning of the full daily over-documentation experiment are dubbed the prologue, while the videos I deemed worthy of saving during the attempt at the daily over-documentation experiment are dubbed Book 1. I consider these selections worthy of literary denominations, as I am of the firm belief that the only way to correctly and truly express myself is through written communication, hence this script. The length of the videos I saved is almost 81 hours or 3 days and 9 hours of content. I did not bother to do the math, but I can only imagine how many months of content I had initially. And in there lies the problem. The messenger, the goal, even my own thoughts and beliefs get lost to time, entropy, faulty haze of memory, and episode upon episode of depersonalization. Even the naming scheme I used was so esoteric it rendered the usefulness of the archive to both the algorithms and viewers totally useless. It was a simple month, date, day, year naming scheme. Each episode was the number, the day it was released. Speaking of the algorithm, I have no intention of appeasing or doing this for noticeability, fame, or fortune. I will continue to upload totally erratically as I deem fit with no recompense. Now let us move on to the recording of what all happened this year, so it is not lost to memory failure. The first event, crisp at the beginning of the year, was a failed attempt to make a friendship. However, thankfully this person turned out to not be worthy of my time. The second major event occurred too in January, where I was put in contact with a married couple of whom could no longer have children, and they initially advertised they wanted me as their surrogate father. This would all be natural, mind you. No natural insemination. They initially fawned over my academic achievements, blue eyes, and tall stature. But quickly, once I began asking some questions I felt were basic or necessary, and even rejecting some of their demands, in essence, once I began standing up for myself and negotiating, they started ghosting me, started blatantly ignoring me, and eventually stopped contacting me. So I blocked them. The general idea was they wanted me to feel like I was being weird or creepy. They're just game playing morons. In February, I began the desperate search for the reason behind my exceedingly low energy, general lethargy, shortness of breath, severe malnutrition, inability to put on weight, and 12-hour sleep cycles. I resolved this through the meal plan, and we are still working on that to see where it leads, but it is a start. And the meal plan, which I did not mention, now that I read that through, is beef, pears, pepitas, oysters, whitefish, etc. Good stuff. I'll go into it maybe in a separate video. Of course, at that same time, as all this research and all this stress, on Valentine's Day of all days, I approached a woman with the intention of asking her out. She was the perfect manifestation of my ideal woman in appearance, in her beliefs, of being religious, even in being married young, which she was already. Thankfully, I saw the rock before making a scene. Either way, it was a blessing in disguise, as I later found out she was a total ditz. As March began, I had been back on dating and friendship sites, apps, etc., for some time, attempting to meet people since January. In March, I met a man on a site who I connected with, and he wanted to introduce me to one of his female friends who was looking for companionship. We agreed to meet, and ultimately I was stood up. Something good came of it. I once again deleted the apps and the accounts on the sites before any more of my energy was drained. It showed that I had learned from the incidents in 2023, and that my recovery times were getting faster, that I was getting sharper and more self-esteem. However, for the first time in my life, I felt numb. I had never understood what people meant by numbness up to this point. I always felt everything to its fullest extent. Something in me snapped, and I finally became numb. I would like to believe I am over this numbness by now, but I am not entirely sure. April ended with a bang. Bad, horrible, lifelong damage. Upon having a massive argument with my parents, they drove up to confront me in person. At my workplace. This resulted in long battles, fighting, total sense of degradation, but it proved things I had suspected true, while also provided closure on matters that had always bugged me, irked me to my core, with no way to prove if I was feeling right until now. I will not get into it too much as it was an incredibly personal bad fight. I intend to compile the life-altering videos I made over the years into one and release it sometime next year, perhaps on the anniversary of the channel. But I haven't truly decided on this. Perhaps I will speak on this matter prior to then as well. It all depends. I have an idea. I have a series of life-altering videos that I've recorded over many years, that I never released, that were like videos essentially I censored because they were too personal or whatever. And I'm thinking of compiling them all and releasing them next year. Anyway. Once over, I found myself at such a lack of energy that I could hardly function. So I began meditating on why I was so exhausted and how to conserve energy. I came to the realization that I had lived my whole life as what others expected from me, always giving 100% even when they gave me nothing in return. For example, if someone mentioned a band they liked, I listened to the band's entire discography. If someone mentioned they liked an accordion, I bought them an accordion. Which I did both of these things, by the way. Even as I write this, I have trouble rationalizing my desire for pure agape with the necessary preservation of my well-being. It is not discarding people so much as it is people who do not want help cannot be helped. And it is in this you must recognize and not waste your energy on. People who do not want help cannot be helped. At the beginning of April, I began a conversation with James Charnley, the twin brother of deceased schizophrenic artist Brian Charnley, of whom James wrote a book about. I was recommended his art from the Unhealthy Conversations with AI when asking about public domain or Creative Commons artists who painted what depersonalization felt like. When I laid eyes on the last canvases of the self-portrait series, specifically the second to last, I was brought to tears. Brian committed suicide the day he painted that last canvas. I have been teetering on that second to last painting. The Bob Dylan lyric, the very idea of hope, that is where I am now, even. However, upon attempting to have a conversation with James despite his initial interest in me, he acted extremely dismissive and essentially told me to go away. Are you noticing any patterns in my life? In May, of which it is May as I compile this screed, it is now June. In May, I was once again going to ask out another woman, and was let down when I found out she was yet another ditz. I also had accomplished a lot, finally getting my car insured for ride sharing. I specifically wanted this to test food delivery as a potential vehicle, pun intended, if you can consider that a pun, for financial independence and to free myself from this soul-crushing work. The delivery turned out to be nothing. I barely made over $100 over 7 days. I lost nearly $200 total net to gas and expenditures. Thankfully, at least as I write this, I am hopeful that my current job opportunity pans out. Even if not, I will simply continue to try and find a higher paying part-time work. Less hours, more money is the goal. And here's to hoping that tomorrow, this pans out. Now, on to the next section. I'm going to give you a brief mention of what the alt-right was and stood for when I was made aware of its existence in 2022. Initially, the essential practice was questioning authority, consensus, and calling out the basic hypocrisy of the lovelessness of the world that the world has descended into. The core belief of the alt-right, stripped of all fantasy, was an idea that eternal, selfless, unconditional love exists. Not only does it exist, or that you are perpetually loved by the gods, but that it exists within us all. Within humanity is born this intrinsic love for one another, and that bringing out, striving for, and improving ourselves every day to be able to give, and to deserve that kind of love, which is given whether we deserve it or not. That divine love, agape, eternal, unconditional, selfless love, that is the core of the alt-right. To improve ourselves, to get to express that love, to be deserving of that love which is already given to us, whether we deserve it or not. That life is about what you refrain from doing instead of what you do. That there is real non-material love. That infinite goodness not only exists, it is perfectly achievable. The idea that we are not perfect, perhaps never perfect, and should subsequently dedicate every single breath we take towards improving ourselves. That is the foundation of the alt-right. The alt-right has now come to stand for socialism, anti-individualist groupthink, pro-science consensus dependent upon concepts like objectivism, accelerationism, and arbitrary transient rituals like so-called traditions, defaulting into total unabashed hypocrisy. Once a movement that stated consensus is the root of all rot, now pines for a consensus based on natural law, objective reality, and emergent morals and tradition, and all these things are in quotes. Most figures of the alt-right theologically have become total hypocritical heretics of their own making. All, not some, not one, but all, so-called Christian members of the alt-right subscribe to a watered-down version of Markianism and Markian of Sinop's teachings. This being the belief that only the New Testament is legitimate, and that the Old Testament is totally false, and that the Old Testament portrays a separate false God, which either no longer exists or has been overwritten by the new loving God of the New Testament. The other camp is divided into Sunni Islam. However, just like the quote-unquote Christians, this version of Islam too includes debauchery, vanity, and participatory experience chasing for accelerationism or claimed objective tactical research. Need I name the examples of these egregious hypocrisies? From the now heavy focus on genetics and IQ, the movement has become synonymous with race communism. Blood and soil socialism, where all members of an arbitrary random selection of certain members are treated and cared for, shared resources, care and support, etc. without recompense, while maintaining staunch Darwinism and, in the heaviest quotes, reason for all others. The idea that scientific venture is at all valid in any sense of the word was once considered total lunacy to the movement. Now they parade around advice from doctors, or as I call them, butchers, and follow the butcher's word as gospel, claiming consensus-based objective reality exists after spending nearly a century being told by the consensus that the movement's worldview is not based in objective reality, is the definition of an oxymoron. No pundit advocates for total opt-out of the system. Instead, they often advocate for hyper-degeneracy via becoming a skilled laborer extremely dependent on the system to provide for you, or quasi-infiltration of the system to presumably act out some kind of change from within, and or active promotion of the very ideals they claim to despise in the name of accelerating the lunacy of the current system into total collapse. That's what accelerationism is. Even the support of bizarre rituals invented not more than 500 years ago that hold meaning to those long since dead of whom you have absolutely no connection to whatsoever, and calling them traditions. All backed up by menageries created by the very same experts of the system the alt-right claim to loathe. The Neo Enlightenment is a rejection of everything mentioned above. In no particular order, the Neo Enlightenment is an individualist, subjective, amoral, anti-arbitrary, anti-authority, anti-consensus, anti-material, anti-monopoly, monopoly being monopoly itself, negotiating with competition to any capacity, oligopoly, over-regulation preventing small businesses, etc., anti-science, Darwinism, evolution, race, genetics, gravity, atomic and subatomic physics, etc., anti-suffering, anti-transient, anti-trust, anti-vice, abusing chemicals like drugs and alcohol, damaging things like entertainment and transient fleeting pleasures, etc., anti-groupthink, archetypes, class, etc., anti-censorship, anti-tax, anti-education, anti-judgment, reason does not exist, human reason is flawed, debate is pointless, argument is pointless, etc., anti-democracy, anti-socialism, anti-laissez-faire, anti-social tolerance, e.g., participation in any of the following: social games like basic manipulation tactics or likability, social status like wealth, age, or other transient factors, relationships factoring in anything material whatsoever, etc., anti-hypocrisy as the highest crime, anti-high concepts, theory, inference, etc., pro-minimalism, pro-bare hands pragmatism, as in what you can do with your bare hands, pro-decentralization, pro-source to table, pro-monasticism, pro-mysticism, pro-enlightenment, pro-life, e.g. no mercy killing, no contraception, no death penalty, no forcing to someone to work for food and water, etc., pro-independence, pro-self-sufficiency, pro-freedom, speech, to act, etc., pro-private property, pro-self-defense, pro-privacy, pro-anonymity, pro-innocent until proven guilty, pro-right to try, pro-donation, pro-charity, pro-opt-in for anything, not being forced in by default and having to fight to opt out, pro-federalism, pro-geographic republicanism, e.g. division of government by geographic borders, as opposed to race, religion, etc., pro-forgiveness, pro-second chance only, pro-abstraction, direct physical observations like tree falls once cut, focusing on how something operates and treating it as independent from any other thing, even if it's duplicate or otherwise, as pro-abstraction. Pro-responsibility to the point of it was your responsibility for tolerance too. And many more pros and cons to come. Pros and antis to come. The point is not to focus so much on the material or the defined concepts I have listed here. The general idea is this. Essentially, that you should stop denying your reality. No one can know something better than you. There is no authority above you aside from the gods. Nothing exists outside of what you think exists, or what you think does not exist. Anti-boogeymanism. Boogeyman being the idea of something you cannot control. Race, atomic physics, certifications, etc. Anti-boogeymanism is the idea that nothing, not one single thing within reality, is outside of your immediate control. And subsequently, nothing beyond what is actionable to you directly in this moment, with your bare hands, is either real or significant to any capacity. Now, the next section. What red-pilled me? A meditation I have been focused on for months now is the question concerning what red-pilled me. Red-pilled me. Well, what is red-pilling? Black-pilling is the nihilistic negative root of pointlessness and hopelessness. The easy path. White-pilling is showing that there is hope and there are alternatives. Red-pilling is the independence showing you can make your own alternatives, etc. That you have purpose, meaningful, actionable power over your choices and surroundings and life. And so much more, but that is the gist. So what red-pilled me? Well, I discovered the alt-right through Linux YouTube, specifically by watching DistroTube and then finding Luke Smith through Derek. I was enraptured with Luke. He was, well, as so often on this channel, I shall quote him to explain how I feel. There's a quote from Luke Smith. Really what happens is that in your heart of hearts, like, you kind of already know what's true and what's not. And what you don't need is someone to influence you to that opinion. What you need is for someone to say that, and then you're like, yeah, you know what? I've always thought that. This is from the Luke Smith Return to Normalcy interview at the 41-minute mark. I think not so much hope or desire that I may well be that voice for someone. But that is stating what you already know to be true, laying it out in a way you can pair it in your internal dialogue that makes sense. That is not what made me this way. As he points out, it stems from your heart. And from my heart, it does stem. Throughout my life, I have only known one true thing. That it is my purpose on this earth to find my soulmate. It is the only thing I desire, the only thing that brings true happiness, and the only thing I do not find agonizing. What I do find agonizing is being alone my whole life. I watched as the rest of the people around me lived in the system, went about their day, had their social milestones, as some call them, and have things happen to them, as they all say. Nothing has happened to me. Nothing. Nothing has happened that I did not directly cause. My whole life, I have felt like the live studio audience, laughing at the main character's misfortune. Yet I have always held a narrative mind. I see myself, my life, as a character, a narrative, both as my history and as my future. Even my present I view through the lens of a story or plot. Keep all this in mind as I explain something. Once my mother randomly told me about one of my neighbors. Kids my age, we grew up on the same street, but they were hardly allowed to hang out and lots of drama. I just liked them anyway. She told me about the girl of whom I was interested in asking out. My mother spoke casually of the fact that the girl had a boyfriend and, quote, just, you know, how it is. During my senior project, I had a conversation with one of the people in my group about our lives and so forth. I detailed mine to his. He told me his life story. Got out of school, went into the Navy, got married, had a couple of kids. Just, you know how it is. My coworker was detailing to me about how her grandchildren grew up, and it seemed not months ago, she held them in the crook of her arm as infants, and that now they were out kissing girls, and just, you know how it is. I regret to inform you, I do not know how it is. I have yet to have my first kiss. I have yet to hold hands. I lost my virginity, sure. I feel obligated to share that point, to point out the lunacy, to exemplify the lunacy, to point out what red-pilled me. While others were living a lie, imitating a life they saw in a movie, I was living reality. My reality, or just reality. A reality so far removed from theirs that I can no longer comprehend it. Foolish implying that I ever could. That is what red-pilled me. That is what sent me on this quest to study what is and what is not. That is what it is. It was this that proved to me reality is nothing. That existence is subjective by nature. And I would like to close with this. The Neo Enlightenment, stripped of all terms and jargon and timeliness, can be defined as the perpetual self-improvement towards achieving eternal, selfless, unconditional love for all things. To sit with all that you have done and all that you have failed to do. In a word, peace.